Welcome to another wonderful Susannah Calloway audiobook. We are excited to have you with us. Before we begin the story, please like and subscribe to our channel and share it with friends. This allows us to continue adding free clean Western romance audiobooks for you to enjoy. The following title is copyrighted by Susannah Calloway, Western romance author. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and enjoy the story. A Seamstress Finds Love. Chapter 1. Landy Grant looked up at his friend's expectant face. The quill was steady in his hand, but his brain seemed to have frozen up. He simply couldn't put down the words that Jess Atwood had asked him to write. Jess shifted uncomfortably in the chair and coughed. It was still early in the morning, but the strong Nebraskan sun was already slanting into Landy's newspaper office. The shaft of light that passed through the cracked window pane illuminated the dust swirling around the shabby room. "Maybe you should use one of those fancy new fountain pens, Landy." Jess said the word pen slowly and carefully, as though it was a hugely complicated new term that he was trying out for the first time. Landy got up and looked out the window at the ramshackle town of Mossy Meadow. The stagecoach had just arrived and people were milling around it excitedly as a newly arrived family disembarked and their bundle of boxes were unloaded. Would this remote, rough place be where their dreams came true? This town was growing faster than anyone had ever imagined it would. Landy should be happy to see how it was progressing, but all he felt right now was a bitter taste at the back of his throat. This godforsaken place had been cruel to him when all that he had ever wanted was a chance to build a happy life here. Right, Jess? He sat down behind his modest desk and picked up the quill again. Behind this desk and with his faithful old quill in his hand was when Landy most felt in charge of his life these days. If he were honest, he would admit that this was his refuge, where he ran to escape from everything else when life got too much for him. Let's try a different approach. Let's look at it like a business contract we are writing out here. Jess scratched his head with his big, blunt fingers. A business contract? This is a love letter I want you to write for me. Landy felt an unidentifiable emotion run through his heart. It had been so long since he had felt a strong emotion that he struggled to identify it at first. The rugged, illiterate farmer sitting in front of him had walked into his office and said the simple words that Landy hadn't been able to say for so long. Now, he couldn't even write them down either. "I need some love in my life, buddy." That was how the conversation had started a few minutes earlier. Landy had written thousands of words over the years that he had lived out here. Always behind the same wooden desk and using the same old quill that he still stubbornly refused to exchange for a modern fountain pen. Yet, he couldn't put his friend's heartfelt plea into words. "I'm so sorry if this is opening old wounds for you, buddy. I never thought about that before I came here. I should have realized you're still hurting." Jess picked up his hat and stood, ready to leave. "Wait, Jess. Let me help you. Just tell me the story again one more time." The newspaper owner lifted his heavy boots onto the desk and stretched back in his chair while the farmer told his story. He closed his eyes and pinched his nose, trying hard to control his breathing and not show any emotion at what Jess had to say. "Well, shucks, you know I've been so lonely out here, Landy. Heck, we're all lonely men here. I've tried to throw myself into my work day and night, but it just ain't natural for a man to be alone. It ain't right. If God had wanted us to live alone, he wouldn't have created ladies, would he? I understand." A deep, throbbing pain was starting to hurt his head. The images of the past were starting to come back to him again. A pretty young woman in bed, shaking uncontrollably with a deadly fever that nothing could stop. An older, dignified woman mounting a horse and waving goodbye. He stood up and shook his head to try and chase away the images that had haunted him for years. "And who exactly is this letter that you want to write for?" "For her." "Who?" "My future wife. She is called Colleen. She replied to my advert for a mail-order bride last month. She's a shy girl from Ireland who is living in Boston and now wants to start a new life in Nebraska. With me. I can hardly believe my luck, to be honest." "I see. And you want me to start off with the phrase you say you have prepared? Yes. The farmer closed his eyes and again repeated the words he had memorized, savoring each one as it came out of his mouth. His voice had grown softer, as though he was really speaking directly into the ear of the beloved Colleen that he had never even met. My darling love, I am waiting as patiently as I can for the day when you will join me here and our love will make us as one. I am sending you the money for your stagecoach journey. I am sure that God will bring you to me safely. Jess was embarrassed when he opened his eyes and saw his friend staring at him. Everyone in town knew of Landy's bad luck in love. To have lost 2 wives and be left alone to bring up 3 young children must be tough. He shouldn't have come here, knowing that love was the one subject that was off limits when talking to the tall, slim writer. It was clear that Landy had shut off that part of life after the tragic death of his second wife. Yet, Jess simply didn't know anyone else who was capable of writing a letter like this for him. Most of the residents of this rough, dusty town had received as little education as he had and were barely able to sign their own names when necessary. Landy was the smartest man in town, and he was a good friend to anyone who knew how to respect his privacy and keep their distance. Hey, maybe you should, look for a mail-order bride, too. There are plenty of lovely girls out east who would be happy to. He stopped talking abruptly as soon as he saw the storm clouds gathering in Landy's gray eyes. Did I ask for your advice, Jess? Did I ask you how I should live my life? Do you think I sit here waiting to see what wonderful words of wisdom Jess Atwood can come up with to brighten up my day? He choked back the next words, the ones that he really wanted to say. Why couldn't he just open up and confess to someone after all these years? The pain and the bitterness were eating him up inside, but he knew deep down that a friend like Jess would listen and try to help if he let him. Sorry, Landy. Gosh, I think I made a big mistake in coming here after all. You have your own problems to deal with, and I'm just making things worse for you. Yes, I do, Jess. Do you know what it is like to look after 3 kids alone? Well, I can tell you. It's hard work, and it's a lonely life. But I've lost 2 wives to this cursed town and I don't intend to lose a third. Sometimes we just have to accept our destiny and get on with life as best we can. Well, I don't want to accept my destiny as a single man. Colleen is my destiny. We all deserve a chance at finding happiness, buddy. I had my chance. 2 chances, if I am being honest. Now it's your turn, Jess, so don't worry about me. Let's finish your letter, and we'll get your Colleen here as soon as possible. They finished the letter in silence and then, each went their own way. Jess was overjoyed with the prospect of a new life, but Landy could feel the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. Chapter 2. The stagecoach driver was looking around with a puzzled expression. It was time to leave Boston for the long journey out west. Yet, one of the passengers was missing. He quickly looked round the interior and worked out that it was the pretty girl with the green eyes and the Irish accent who had left her seat. He had noticed her right away when she had climbed on board. She was small and attractive, but something about the look in her eyes and her way of moving told him that she wasn't be messed with. He had briefly thought about flirting with her, but her curt reply to his first comment told him that she just wanted to be left alone. Has anyone seen the pretty Irish girl? The one with black hair and green eyes? She was here a minute ago, and now she's gone. She's over there. Give me a moment and I'll see what's wrong. A plump, well-dressed lady took it upon herself to sort things out. They were all anxious to get the long, uncomfortable journey started once and for all. She walked over to the busy stagecoach office, where the young lady was sitting with her chin cradled in her hands. Her eyes had a steely determination and toughness about them, but the other woman's years of experience meant that she was able to detect an underlying sadness in there, too. Feeling some last-minute nerves, are you, dear? No. Yes. I guess so. It's such a big change in my life. I've always lived in the city and now I'm going out west to the great unknown with only a vague idea of what I want from my future. Maybe this is all a big mistake, just like everyone told me it was. It's not a mistake at all, dear. I did the same thing a few years ago. I was terrified too, but it all worked out well for me in the end. What happened? How did you make your new life work out so well? Come on, let's get this journey started, and I'll tell you everything. We've got hours ahead of us to talk about things and make you feel more relaxed. The two women soon become good friends during the long, bumpy ride out to Nebraska. The older lady was called Doris, and she was now a successful businesswoman who had overcome various terrible setbacks in her life, thanks to a positive outlook and a seemingly endless supply of homespun wisdom. Once she had finished telling her life story to date, it was getting dark outside and any signs of the city had long since disappeared. They were traveling over a seemingly endless, green plain. It was impossible to think that they would soon arrive to a place with mountains, rivers, and bustling new towns. All around them, they could see nothing but grass and the occasional tree. Katherine realized with a start that this part of the country was even emptier and more desolate than she had imagined. She hadn't seen even a single person or house in what seemed like hours. It was scary to be so far from other people. What about you, dear? All I know is that you have a lovely Irish accent and even lovelier green eyes. What brings you out here on this stagecoach heading to the end of the earth? Oh, I don't even know your name yet. Katherine. Katherine Moore, and I guess I needed to start over again. It's been a tough few years since we moved to Boston. Everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong. That's a real shame. Oh, I'm sorry for depressing you with my hard luck story. I'm usually a bit more cheerful than this, but I'm feeling quite nervous just now. Doris's eyes shone brightly in the dark, and she nodded silently. Her initial impressions of the younger woman were right after all. She was running away from something rather than running toward it. She knew that sort of decision never usually worked out well in the end, but maybe there was still time to help. Men problems? Katherine opened her mouth to speak but quickly closed it again. Where could she start with her awful story of hard luck and betrayal? The mere thought of reliving that humiliating day when she was left standing at the altar was enough to make her feel queasy. She had pushed the humiliation to the back of her mind as she had decided to rebuild her life once again, but it was still there, taunting her and causing her to doubt herself at every turn. To be honest, I'd rather talk about the future than dwell on the mistakes of the past. My plan is to find a little town that is growing and that needs a good seamstress. Then I won't need to rely on anyone else to help me ever again. You can make clothes? Yes, I learned from my mother. Before she passed away. I'm so sorry. And your father? Katherine shook her head sadly. It was true, she was all alone in the world and had no one to turn to in her darkest moments. In some way, that had made her decision to make the trip out west easier to take. She no longer had any ties in Boston or elsewhere. Gosh, how did you have the courage to make a trip like this all alone? I so admire your bravery, Katherine. My grandma always told me that if I don't go forward then I'll end up going backward. What she didn't add was that she felt as though she had spent the last year or more constantly going backward. It was time to do something about it. Wise words. Very wise. They passed a large lake that could only just be made out in the distance. Katherine was beginning to feel very far from home. She hadn't left Boston since arriving there from Ireland as a child, and now, she was heading out to a part of the country that almost everyone had warned her against going to. This could be the worst decision of her life, although to be fair, there had been a fair bit of competition for that title lately. Doris's eyes were twinkling even more brightly now. Her voice took on a playful tone as she looked at Katherine innocently. You do know that there are about 100 men to every woman in some of those towns out west? They are all looking for a wife, but there just aren't enough single women to go around. So I heard, but finding a husband isn't part of my plans at all. Maybe in a few years' time if God is willing, but right now I am a serious businesswoman with no time for men. Doris laughed heartily and slapped her fellow passenger's thigh with one of her meaty hands. It stung more than she had probably meant it to, and Katherine tried to hide the pain. Dear, you'll be beating love-struck farmers and cattle owners away from your door night and day. The sooner you find yourself a good husband, the quicker you will be able to get on with life without being bothered by every hot-blooded man west of Massachusetts. Chapter 3. The sun was shining down fiercely on Mossy Meadow as the stagecoach pulled up outside the office. Katherine looked out, eager to get her first glimpse of the place that she had decided to make her home. She grimaced at the sight of a collection of hastily put-together wooden buildings and gave an involuntary shudder. The place looked utterly horrible. It was even worse than she had been warned that it would be. Her new friend, Doris, had gotten off at a slightly bigger and far better-looking town a couple of hours earlier, where her handsome husband had been waiting for her to arrive. They had promised to stay in touch with each other, exchanged addresses, with Katherine only able to supply the town's name, and had briefly hugged before Katherine completed the rest of the journey alone and in silence. She had chosen Mossy Meadow pretty much at random, relying on instinct and the fact that it sounded so nice. "Is there a decent hotel in town?" Katherine had taken a chance and asked the first friendly-looking person that she saw walking along the dusty path that she guessed was the main street. Horses were drinking from troughs at the side of the street and music could be heard coming from one of the buildings. The young man she had asked began to slowly look her up and down in a way that made her feel very uncomfortable. "Well, there's a hotel over there. How much do you charge?" A strong smell of alcohol came off his breath as he pointed to a building that looked like it might fall down if a strong breeze hit it. She quickly walked away from the drunk man and crossed the main street, avoiding straggly weeds, some broken bottles and piles of horse excrement. It was becoming increasingly difficult to see what had inspired the pretty name of this awful place. There was no moss in sight and very little evidence of meadows either. She had to pass through the bar to reach the reception desk, which was an awful experience. The lively conversations all stopped dead and every single head in the place turned to look at her as she tried to look confident and in control of the situation. She really just wanted to curl up and hide, though. A few wolf whistles sounded out as she went past the tables. She tried her best to look as serious as possible, but her legs were starting to shake by the time she got to the hotel's untidy desk. The sight of a friendly female face behind the hotel reception desk helped her to relax a little. "I see that newcomers are big news here. Only if it's a pretty woman like you. Let's hurry upstairs before one of those brutes feels brave enough to come over and grab you." The middle-aged woman gently guided Katherine up some creaky stairs to a small and sparse room that had a view of the main street. "This is the furthest room from the saloon, so it shouldn't be too noisy at night. What brings you to Mossy Meadow anyway? Are you looking for a husband out here?" "No." The Irish girl hadn't meant to blurt out her response so loudly and forcefully. She now blushed furiously as she tried to regain her calm. "Ah, you must be of the religious sort, then. I hope you don't mind if the odd curse word escapes from my lips. I try to run this pace as best I can, but it isn't easy with a drunk husband and 5 kids to take care of at the same time. Only God knows how I manage to curse as little as I do." "Oh no, I'm not religious." "Well, that's not true. I do believe in God. I came here to start a seamstress business. I want a fresh start somewhere new that has opportunities for a hard-working girl." The hotel owner laughed and spat out some tobacco at Katherine's feet. A quick look at the floor revealed that this was probably a fairly common habit in this hotel. "Why don't you see whether Lucky Clayton has a spare room or 2 in his old house you could use? It's right next to the newspaper office on the corner over there." "I will. Thanks. And be careful out there. This town is dangerous for a pretty young thing like you. There are so many single men here in town that they can smell a woman from a mile away." She winked at Katherine. "Not that you're interested in men at all, I know." Katherine felt her face flush. It already seemed as though everyone here was going to just assume that she had come to find herself a man. As Katherine stepped out of the hotel onto the main street, the heat and noise almost knocked her off her feet. The air was filled with strange smells and she had to keep her wits about her to avoid being knocked over by a horse or a wandering drunk. "This town is going to take some getting used to it, but I am ready to give it my best shot." Just as she had finished muttering to herself, a rough hand landed on her shoulder and spun her around. Katherine lost her footing and fell face down onto the dirt street. As she stood up, spitting out dust and disoriented, she could hear mocking laughter all around her. A crowd of men came running out of the saloon to see what was happening. She wiped the dirt from her dress and gritted her teeth. Having grown up with 4 older brothers, Katherine knew how to take care of herself in a fight. She balled up her right hand and threw a mighty punch at the man who had grabbed her. Sadly, she was still half blinded by the dust in her eyes and had also misjudged the height of her adversary, so she only succeeded in thumping her fist painfully into his shoulder. Oohs and ahs from the crowds rang out all around. A few people shouted encouragement to one or other of the fighters. No one seemed in a rush to help out a damsel in distress, though. Katherine felt as though she was stuck in a bad dream, as the noises and the heat made her head spin. Wait, the man's words were drowned out as Katherine shoulder-charged him, taking him completely by surprise. He flopped backwards, crashing into a horse that was drinking water from a trough behind him. He got back up and staggered towards her, holding up his hands in a sign of peace. Do you want more of the same, you big brute? All of the tension and fears of her big move out here had transformed into pure energy and rage. She had never felt so powerful in her life. Wait. The man gasped for breath. My wife. Katherine stopped in her tracks, with her right fist raised at shoulder height. Of course, it was impossible that she was his wife, but he seemed so convinced of the fact that she started to doubt what on earth was going on. What kind of bizarre, messed up place had she come to, where one of the first people she met claimed to be married to her yet got into a street brawl with her? A well-dressed, slim man came running out of a nearby office and pushed the crowd aside. As he got closer, she saw that he was taller than most of the people around her but wasn't as young as he looked at first. He was probably a few years older than she was, but something in his attitude made him seem so much older. Jess. What the heck are you doing with that girl? It's my Colleen. She's arrived at last. Katherine looked on, utterly mystified, as the man she had been fighting explained how he had been told that a pretty Irish girl had arrived on the stagecoach. He was totally convinced that she was the bride that he was waiting on. If there's one thing I didn't come here to do, it is become someone's wife. I am most certainly not your Colleen. However, she felt a pang of sympathy as Jess looked crestfallen to realize that his Colleen hadn't arrived after all. It looked as though it really had been an honest mistake. Meanwhile, the man who had come to her rescue was quietly chuckling to himself beside her. He took her by the elbow and guided her over to the hotel. Katherine was confused but let herself be taken across the street, which was now emptying of the onlookers who had enjoyed the spectacle. She had never been so embarrassed in her life. My name is Landy. If you need anything, you'll find me in the newspaper office right over there. Oh, thanks. I think. Landy laughed at her confused face and dirty dress. This had really brightened up a dull day for him in a town where nothing interesting usually happened. And welcome to Mossy Meadow. You've already made quite the impression here. The new arrival looked across the street and felt her hands starting to ache from where she had punched Jess. Surely things could only get better from here on in. Chapter 4. Landy felt happier and more relaxed than he had done in some time. With his boots up on his desk and a glass of cold beer beside him, he smiled as he looked out of his office window. Maybe this was the day he had been waiting for, when life started to feel worth living again. He had a good feeling in his bones ever since he woke up but was worried that it might disappear if he thought about it too much. The smile was wiped from his face when the door was swung violently open. Katherine stormed in, holding the morning's edition of his newspaper in front of her like the prize exhibit in a court case. I can't believe that you printed this story. How could you be so insensitive? Her green eyes were blazing, and her arms were now tensed by her side. Landy tried to remain calm, but her appearance and her attitude were causing his heart to race for some reason. Now that she had cleaned up and changed into a new dress, she was even more attractive than he had thought she was yesterday. Ah, you must mean the story of old man Nolan losing a foal while trying to cross the river. It was certainly a sad Katherine cut him off by slamming the newspaper on his desk and starting to read from it. The latest resident to arrive to Mossy Meadow did so in an unorthodox manner, as she started a hilarious street brawl with popular local farmer, Jess Atwood. The feisty Irish immigrant was apparently upset at being mistaken for being Jess's new wife, although onlookers were amazed at her overreaction to what was simply a humorous misunderstanding. Sheriff Clements stated he wouldn't be arresting the attractive pugilist from the Emerald Isle, although he did mention that he would be looking to have a word with her to make sure she calms that aggressive streak before someone around here ends up with a busted lip. Landy's smiling face only served to infuriate her even more. She didn't notice his hand tremble as he attempted to calmly pick up his trusty quill. It had been a long time since he had felt so alive and aware of all of his senses. Perhaps you would like the chance to tell your side of the story in an interview? Maybe you would like to challenge all comers to a bare-knuckle duel outside the saloon at dawn? Just as she was about to retort, Katherine caught a glimpse of something in his eyes. It was only a fleeting moment, but she realized that he was joking. She took a deep breath and tried to change her attitude. It was important to make a good impression in her new hometown and to show that she wasn't some sort of angry, humorless woman who was only here to make enemies. I am happy to carry out an interview, but only if you use a proper fountain pen for it. Didn't you hear that those old quills died out with the dinosaurs? Landy smiled, more with relief than anything else. He felt his heart slow down and his hands stop shaking. He couldn't even remember the last time that he had chatted with an attractive, single young woman, but something about this new arrival made him feel ready to enjoy the conversation. First question. What brought you to Mossy Meadow? Was it our wonderful climate? You do look as though 12 hours of fierce sun each day might add some much-needed color to that pale Irish skin. I think it was the quality local journalism, more than anything. The truth is that it is so much easier to write interesting stories when colorful characters come here to live. Can I ask how long you have lived here? I thought I was interviewing you. Not until I see a modern fountain pen in your hand, you aren't. Landy thought for a moment about how best to answer the question. The truth was that he could barely recall his arrival here. So much had happened since then that he had blocked it out of his mind. Let me think, I must have been 17 or 18 years old. Wow, I didn't realize this place was that old. You might be surprised to learn that I was something of a foolish young man in those days. Impossible. They both smiled slightly. Katherine had sat down in the chair opposite Landy. He offered her a beer, which she politely refused. She hated the stuff as all it did was bring back unwanted memories. Yes, I thought I was going to change the world in those days. I had huge plans. What happened? Landy's body stiffened slightly. What had happened? Life had happened. At first, he had felt carefree and happy here. Then his bad luck had begun, and it hadn't stopped since then. The land that he had bought cheaply seemed to be cursed, as nothing at all grew on it. Then, his beautiful young wife had been struck down by that awful disease. Why hadn't he gotten sick instead of her? Then his second wife had been lost to him as well. Since then, everything that he tried to do here had been doomed to failure from the very start. Even the newspaper wasn't the success that everyone else assumed that it was. He was still paying off the press and other equipment. Deep down, he hoped to pay everything off and earn enough to support a family better, but he was terrified of passing his bad luck onto another woman. Could he live through a third disaster in his love life? He very much doubted it. The world changed me instead. How did that happen? Landy felt the familiar sensation of his heart closing up. He wanted to tell her everything, but he just couldn't bring himself to do it. It was still too soon. Dang, would he ever be able to speak about his feelings to anyone ever again? It just happens sometimes. Anyway, what about you? Did you really mean it when you said that you didn't come here to be anyone's wife? It was now Katherine's turn to clam up. She had already gotten too deeply involved in this conversation. It was time to retreat back into her comfort area like she always did. Exactly. Now if you don't mind, I need to go and find a building for my new seamstress business. Why don't you ask Lucky Clayton? He has a building next door that he doesn't use. So I heard. I will go and look for him now. She stopped once she reached the door and took a deep breath. Thanks, by the way. For what? Katherine shrugged. For making me feel welcome here. I just needed to see a friendly face, I guess. I'll be seeing you around. As the door closed behind her, both of them felt the same sense of unspoken words hanging heavily in the air. At least I hope so. He spoke the words to the closed door but still felt a thrill as he said them. Their conversation had been closer to something personal and intimate than either of them had wanted it to be, but there was still so much to be said later on. If they were going to be neighbors soon, then things could get awkward. Chapter 5. Katherine looked around the room with a growing sense of frustration. She was covered in dust and cobwebs after spending a couple of hours tidying out the worst mess she had ever seen in her whole life. To be honest, it still looked pretty shabby, but as a starting point, it was going to have to make do. She couldn't hold off any longer before opening her business and hopefully making some money. It was clear that the standards of hygiene and decoration weren't particularly high in this town. She felt queasy whenever she saw someone spitting on the ground or urinating in a public place, which was pretty much every time she went outside. Yet, she was determined to keep up her own standards as much as possible. Bathing regularly and keeping her clothes looking good wasn't easy here, but she was working hard to be as presentable as she could be in the circumstances. Katherine was busily scrubbing away a nasty, unidentifiable stain from the wall while holding her nose. She sensed movement behind her and turned to see Landy Grant standing there watching her. She had no idea how long he had been there or what he could possibly want. Clayton let this place go a bit, didn't he? Katherine rushed past him and threw some sticky substance out of the door before gasping in some fresh air and cleaning her hands on a rag. Just a little. Why do they call him Lucky, anyway? Landy rubbed his hands together and looked at his feet. Katherine wondered if this was what he always did when he was getting ready to tell a story. She saw that he was more relaxed today. He was looking her in the eyes with a little more frequency. However, his intense gray eyes still flitted rapidly from side to side when she looked at him, as though they were trying to hide from her. He got shot in the chest 6 times by some bandits when he was out gold mining by the big river a few years ago. That doesn't sound so lucky. Well, the lucky part was that he had put his gold pan under his shirt a few minutes before he was shot. All of the bullets just bounced straight off him. One of them killed his horse. So, it was the horse that wasn't so lucky then. I wrote a story about him and called it, A Dead Horse, a Gold Pan, and a Walking Miracle. Why did he have his pan inside his shirt anyway? Is that some sort of weird tradition round here? He told me that he was taking the pan into town to sell it. He hadn't found a single nugget of gold in over a month out there in the wilds, and he had nothing else left to sell. He wanted to use the money to buy a stagecoach ticket to anywhere else but here. Can you guess what happened next? He found a giant nugget in his underwear when he went to bathe? Nearly. He went to wash out the pan and beat out the dents made by the bullets. It was the very last time he was going to put it in the river, so he swirled it about a bit for old time's sake. A big lump of gold just floated right into it as though Mother Nature was trying to make up for the shock of the attack. Ha ha. He made that bit up. Or else you did. No, it's really true. He built this place and bought a farm with the money he got for the nugget. And the dead horse? Landy shrugged. A dead horse isn't much use to a man out here. I guess he just left it lying there. Hey, do you need any clothes mended? You could be my first customer. I'll have a look. My kids might need something fixed. You have kids. You don't look like the type. I mean, I haven't seen you with them. Katherine was getting increasingly flustered. The news that Landy had kids was a surprise, and she had to admit that it had left her with a strange feeling in the pit of her stomach. Was it disappointment that she now felt? Did she really believe that he was a single man who might be interested in her? Landy was looking ruffled, too. He ran a hand over his hair and glanced nervously at the door, as though working out how to get away without causing a scene. I have 3 kids. That's nice. Yeah. Listen, I've got to go. That's fine. Send my best wishes to your family. They each went about their own business for the rest of the week without seeing each other. Katherine threw herself into the task of bringing the dilapidated building up to scratch. It was hard work, and she quickly realized that the money she had saved wasn't going to stretch as far as she had hoped that it would. Another problem was that there were far fewer women in town than she had expected to find. The men didn't seem to care too much about the state of their clothing, either, so she was going to have to drum up some business wherever she could. However, the biggest problem presently were the rodents that scurried around the building as though they owned it. Clayton had warned that she might see some friendly varmints there, but the truth was that the giant rats had her running scared. She liked to see herself as a tough, independent woman, but there were some things that just shouldn't have to be endured, and sprawling colonies of rats was definitely one of them. Her luck improved one day when a soft voice called out to her from the door. The unfamiliar voice made her drop what she was doing and spin around. Hello. I'm Amy. You must be Katherine. It took her a second for the name to register in her brain. Someone had mentioned Amy the other day as one of the few young women in town that she might like to befriend, but she hadn't got round to looking for her yet. In part, this was because she had been told that Amy was Jess's sister, and she wasn't keen on seeing that man anytime soon. So, you're Jess's sister. Did you know that I got into a street brawl with your brother when I arrived here? Amy laughed shyly into her hand. She looked no older than 17 or so, but she seemed kind, and that made Katherine warm to her right away. Jess told me about that. You can't imagine how embarrassed he is by the whole thing. Oh, and he got a sore jaw for his trouble as well. Well, tell him that the next time I won't let him off so easily. How is he settling into married life, anyway? I've never met a mail-order bride before. It all sounds quite exciting. It's strange, but she hasn't turned up, and he is getting rather worried. But Jess is a good man who will look after her well when she gets here. What about you? Have you found a husband yet? I haven't been looking for one, and I don't intend to either. Oh. Katherine's sudden change of tone and distant attitude left Amy confused. Why wouldn't a woman like her be looking for a husband? Katherine was just as confused. Did everyone think that a desperate need to get married was the only reason that a girl would travel out here? I just want to get this darn business up and running. I'm beginning to think that I might have made a mistake in coming here in the first place. It wasn't meant to be this difficult. In my head, I had imagined coming here and being successful right away. I'm sure things will get better once you settle in. Everyone who comes here needs some time to find their feet. I hope so. I'm just not sure if this town is big enough for a seamstress business to flourish. That reminds me. Jess asked me to order a couple of dresses from you for Colleen. He wants everything to be perfect when she gets here. I want to order one, too. Thank you. That will get me started on something for just now. Wait until winter comes along and everyone wants to wrap up as much as possible. Are the winters really cold here? Brutal. I still can't believe how the weather here changes so much from one season to the next. I love the snow, but it's so cold that stepping outside becomes almost impossible. The two women quickly got into the habit of spending an hour together each morning, talking about each other's experiences to date. They had a lot in common, but there were also enough differences between them to make their conversations interesting and fun. Amy had come here as a wee one with her brother Jess. They had traveled with their parents, who had died after just a couple of years in their new home. Amy had grown up far more quickly than was good for her, but she retained a soft, childlike side that made Katherine look on her as though she were her little sister. Amy proved to be far more adept at kicking out the rodents than her new friend was, while Katherine would sometimes teach her some of her dressmaking skills while they chatted and laughed together. They would talk about many different aspects of life, but Amy quietly realized that there was a subject that couldn't be touched. If she mentioned men or marriage, Katherine would either immediately change the subject or else pretend she hadn't heard anything. There seemed to be something mysterious in her past. Amy was keen to find out what it was, but she learned that she had to tread carefully when talking about the past or Katherine would get upset and go quiet for a while. Money was starting to become more of a pressing issue, too. Katherine was too embarrassed to admit that she had moved out of the hotel and was living in the rundown building that she was also working from. She didn't realize that Amy had already noticed this and was planning how to help. Amy was an observant young lady, and she thought she had the answer to all of her new friends' problems. But it was going to take time and patience to get it done right. Chapter 6. The daily routine that Landy followed hadn't changed in years. He had always been an early riser, so he would get up just as the first rays of sunlight reached his window. His bedroom had a splendid view out to the mountains, and he never tired of looking over to them first thing in the morning. He would then eat a modest, healthy breakfast and leave out the food he had prepared for his kids. They loved eggs and bacon for breakfast, so he would often make this, rolling up his sleeves and enjoying the pleasure of cooking while the rooster crowed outside. After waking up his children, he would spend some time with them while they ate. An older lady named Nancy would come over every morning to look after them and make lunch, so he waited for her arrival and then was free to go to work. Landy could then go for the long, leisurely walk to his office, going around the lovely meadow that gave the town its name before finally reaching the unkempt main road. This gave him valuable thinking time to plan his day and slowly get ready for work. He hated having to start work before he was ready and also hated bumping into anyone who disturbed his early morning train of thought. It was such a drastic change of scenery that he was taken aback every day when he climbed up the grassy ridge and was confronted by the shabby town in front of him. What a shame that all of the people who passed through thought the horrible main street was all there was to Mossy Meadow. Yet, something strange had happened to that inflexible routine lately. When he tried to go for a long walk, he suddenly felt anxious and restless. After a few days, he ended up simply walking directly to his office rather than taking the long route there, meaning that he would often get into town before anyone else was up and about. What he never admitted to himself was that his restlessness had everything to do with his chances of running into his new neighbor, and the quicker he got into town the more likely his chances were. He had noticed that there was a candle lit in Katherine's building early each morning, so he assumed that she had already walked over from the hotel before he arrived. It was only after a few days that he worked out that she had moved out of the hotel and was now living in her workshop. This made him worry about her financial situation and caused him to be even more anxious to see her as soon as possible. So, he walked along the main street as slowly as he could, several times a day. Yet, bad luck and poor timing meant that they never seemed to bump into each other. "Hello there. What's the big news story today?" He hadn't seen Katherine for days, so he was completely taken by surprise when they almost ran into each other outside his office that mid-morning. She was looking radiant, with her long, black hair pulled back and a brightly colored dress on. "Oh. Just the usual. Some cases of cattle theft. New laws being introduced. Pretty dresses being made by the new seamstress." He pointed at her dress, guessing that it was one of her own creations. "I don't think my humble work merits any space in your newspaper." "Why not?" "It could help you to reach new customers. Any new business needs all the help that it can get in the early days." "Are you serious? But it isn't really news, is it? We could make up a story about you as an excuse to mention your workshop." "You mean invent a story about me being a famous seamstress or winning a prestigious award? Or maybe something simple like, new seamstress finally brings fashion to Mossy Meadow." It's the sort of story that people in a town like this expect to see. I'm not exactly spoiled for choice when it comes to things to write about either. The other day, I was reduced to writing about how a farmer's cheese had gone bad because he stored it at the wrong temperature. Remind me to read that one day. No, you really don't want to. It's the worst thing any human being has ever written. And what was your biggest and best story so far? Apart from your brawl with Jess? Apart from that world exclusive? I guess it was the time that the old hotel burned down. Are you telling me that heap is the new hotel? Goodness. Yeah, it isn't going to win any awards, is it? Not until someone starts giving out prizes for the hotels with the most bugs and unidentified stains on the walls. But the old one was even worse. It had a wall that would bang back and forward on windy days, and the roof was so leaky that it rained more indoors than outside. Haha. I guess I'm lucky that I came here after the old hotel had been put out of its misery. Was it a spectacular fire? Yeah, it was a clear night with a big, new moon in the sky. I was down by the river doing some fishing when I saw the sky go bright red over the town and then heard the shouting. I guess things like that don't happen here very often. No, they don't. Are you sure you don't want me to do a short story about your business? Thanks for your concern, but I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that sort of thing. Listen, I really admire your determination in making this business work. I think you're doing a great job by sticking at it even when it can't be very easy. It's either that or go home to Boston with my tail between my legs. The thought of losing her made Landy's throat go dry. He hadn't considered the possibility that she might need to go back east so soon if it didn't work out here. He had grown accustomed to having her around. Maybe you could place an advert in the newspaper instead? Are you really so desperate to fill space in it? It's been a slow week. If I don't write about your business, I might need to start publishing my own poems. She smiled. Please don't do that. Landy put on a serious expression and acted as though he was about to recite a poem that he had dredged up from his memory. Katherine rolled her eyes. Okay. You win. I'll see if I can afford to place a small advert extolling my virtues as the best seamstress in the West. You don't need to pay for it. What? Is your newspaper a charity now as well as a fount of local knowledge? I mean, you can pay for it whenever you are able to. Starting a business from scratch can't be easy. Heck, I can still remember when I had to write out the stories by hand every single day and then had to hand-deliver the newspapers all over town. This is very kind of you. Of course, I'll be expecting an interview from you when you are rich and famous as the seamstress to the West. Hopefully you don't need to wait too long for that. Later on, Katherine couldn't explain to herself what had happened. Somehow, she had been overcome with gratitude at his kindness and had gone up on her tiptoes to give the newspaper man a light kiss on the cheek. It was something she had never dreamed of doing. Her lips barely brushed his stubble, but she felt a bolt of lightning course around her veins. As she lowered herself back down, she looked around quickly. It seemed as though no one had seen them. They were still outside, a few yards away from the newspaper office, but there was no other person in sight. Landy looked shocked. The smile that had been on his face when they had been talking was now completely gone. He looked as though he didn't know where to run. Katherine felt embarrassed at what she had done, but she was more shocked by Landy's reaction. He looked genuinely horrified at receiving a small kiss of gratitude. He mumbled something unintelligible and stumbled into his office, closing the door firmly behind him. Katherine put her hand over her mouth. What had she done? It was all a horrible mistake, and now she had turned one of her only friends in Mossy Meadow away from her. Chapter 7. Amy and Jess stood at the door of their home, looking fairly nervous. Katherine was just as nervous. This was the first time Amy and Jess had invited a friend over to visit. For their guest, it was the first time she had visited a local family like this. Jess playfully adopted a boxing stance as Katherine appeared. His sister scowled at him, but their new friend took it all in good spirit, as she rolled up her sleeves and balled up her hands into fists. Ready for round 2, are you? I'm sorry about that terrible misunderstanding the other day. I heard a lovely Irish girl had arrived, and I was so nervous waiting on my Colleen that I lost control of myself for a minute. Sometimes, my brother doesn't realize his own strength, so he looks like a bit of a brute. But he's really a big softy. I hope you don't greet Colleen like that when she does arrive, or she might just jump back on the stagecoach back to where she came from. Hey, now I've got the two of you ganging up on me. Maybe this meal was a bad idea after all. The three of them went for a walk around the farm. Katherine was still getting used to life in the countryside and had to ask the name of some of the plants. She was delighted to see how patient and tender Jess was when talking about Colleen, even if it did send a pang of jealousy running through her. Would anyone ever speak about her like that? Would a man wait for her, the way that Jess was waiting for Colleen? The land here is incredibly fertile, Katherine. It sometimes feels as though things grow too quickly, so I barely have time to harvest it all. In the next week or so, I'll be running about and harvesting like a madman. I guess that's one of the reasons for wanting to bring a wife here. She immediately regretted saying it, as it sounded colder and harsher than she'd meant it to be. She really didn't mean to make it sound like a cold, heartless, business decision. Jess just smiled and picked a plum off a tree, though. I suppose so. But it's more than that. A man gets very lonely out here at times. I've got Amy to keep me company just now, but she'll soon head off to start a new life with a husband. It isn't as though she's short of offers. Amy nudged her brother in the ribs as her face flushed red. Katherine guessed that a pretty, polite girl like that would be very much in demand. Once they went inside, they didn't seem in a hurry to eat, and Katherine was starting to wonder what was going on. She was close to asking if it was the tradition to eat late in this part of the world when she saw a tall, slender figure walking hurriedly toward the house. Her cheeks flushed bright red. It was Landy. This had all been arranged. The newspaper man appeared just as awkward as Katherine when he arrived. The memory of that fleeting kiss caused both of them to avoid each other's gaze. She could still feel his stubble on her lips, and he could sense her lips on his face if he closed his eyes. There was no way they could go back to being just friends anymore, not after that kiss. Amy said you two knew each other, and we thought it might be a good chance to all get together for a chat. It's good to have some friends close to hand. I saw the both of you together once or twice. Talking and laughing. So, I guessed you had become good friends. Katherine realized with a shock that her friend had seen the fateful kiss. She cursed her own stupidity and impulsiveness. Everyone in town probably knew about it. They probably all thought that she had only come here to snare herself a husband after all. Now she looked like a hypocrite as well as a manhunter, after proclaiming to all the world that she had absolutely no interest in finding a man here. What do you think of Landy's newspaper articles, Katherine? I see that he found time to even write about one about you and me getting to know each other, Amy said. Oh, I think he is doing a grand job with his newspaper. The dress Amy is wearing was made by Katherine, by the way. So you can see how good she is at her job, too, Jess offered. The meal passed by with polite but stilted chatter like this. With the discomfort of Katherine and Landy painfully obvious, all four of them appeared to be just wanting to get the whole thing over with. It had been a bad decision, and Amy regretted trying to help out her friend like this. To help settle everyone down, Jess suggested that they go for a walk down to the lake that was on the edge of the farm. It was a big lake that formed an almost perfect circle and was surrounded by a ring of pine trees. Katherine couldn't believe how the landscape there was so different from in the town. Here, rolling green fields stretched out in front of them, and the hills in the distance made her feel really small and insignificant. She had never such vast expanse, and she imagined what it must be like to climb up one of the hills and see the view. It felt like a land of infinite possibilities, with enough open space for everyone to claim the land needed to make their dreams come true. Would she ever have a family home out here where she could enjoy life in a relaxed style? It's really beautiful. Gracious, I had no idea that we lived so close to such wonderful scenery. Once you get out of town, this place gets a lot easier on the eye. The town is awful, but this is a whole different world. You should spend some more time out here if you want to really get to know the place. The men started talking in great detail, discussing types of soil and the latest farm machinery. Katherine took the opportunity to pull Amy inside while they chatted. The two girls stood under a tree whose branches were bent under the weight of dozens of ripe, red apples. Amy picked one and started to chomp it, while Katherine guided her away from the men toward the edge of the water. A group of ducks splashed past them noisily. You arranged this with Landy. Who? Me? Yes, you. I thought we were friends. We are. Then why did you set me up with Landy without even asking me? What makes you think that I want to get to know him any better than I already know him? Amy was taken aback by the seamstress's outburst. It seemed to be an exaggerated reaction to a simple invitation to a meal with friends. I saw you. I thought. What you saw and what you thought didn't give you the right, Amy. I made it clear that I'm not here to find a husband. Landy is a good man who has been unlucky. Give him a chance, and you will see that. No. She could see the men looking over at the sound of her raised voice, so she took a deep breath and carried on in a lower tone. I wish him the best of luck, but not with me as his wife. I'm not looking for a man, and I don't need one, trust me. Fine, I understand. I won't meddle again. Katherine made her excuses and walked home alone. Her head was pounding, and she realized that she had handled everything all wrong. She kicked a mound of dirt and thousands of tiny ants came running out to see what was going on. Settling in here was going to be even harder work than she had imagined. Chapter 8. The next few days dragged by for Landy. He felt listless as he tried to concentrate on the rather boring articles that he had to write. The arrival of Katherine had caused something to stir inside him. He felt more comfortable talking to her than he had felt with any woman since his second wife had passed away. He wasn't sure why, but he had felt so relaxed beside her. Then she had gone and ruined it all with that badly timed kiss. He started to get more and more irritable as the days passed. It soon became obvious to him that deep down he had started to believe that life might have been about to give him another chance. Now, it had taken that chance away from him, before he even had the time to grasp it. Landy still looked out for Katherine each day. But he felt sure that she was avoiding him. In such a small town, it seemed almost certain that their paths would cross more often. One day, he was drinking a cold beer in his office. His chair had now been positioned in such a way that he could see the door of the seamstress office if he leaned over to his left. While doing this, he saw Katherine take out a ladder and put it on the wooden boardwalk. She started washing the filthy upstairs windows that hadn't been cleaned in years. Landy had his heart in his mouth as he saw how the ladder wobbled from one side to another while she scrubbed furiously. It looked as though his neighbor hadn't taken note that it was an old, rickety ladder that threatened to fall apart at any moment. He was torn in two minds. Should he go out and warn her, or would she take it the wrong way if he showed his genuine concern for her safety? The ladder wobbled even more dangerously as Landy finally made up his mind and rushed outside. Katherine shouted something unintelligible just as he reached the ladder. It was slowly sliding down. She tried to grab onto the window, but it was too late. The ladder slid away from under her, and she was left grasping thin air. Landy instinctively took a few steps back, steadied himself, and reached out his hands. He braced himself, with just enough time to wonder whether trying to catch her would cause more harm than good. Thankfully, Katherine's falling body landed almost perfectly in his open arms, with her legs flailing while he bent over with all of her weight pressing down on him. They fell together in a messy heap on top of the wooden boardwalk. The ladder came crashing down a little further over. It didn't look very dignified, but the two of them were just relieved to see that no serious harm had been done. No one else was around. The silence after the sounds of the falling ladder seemed full of tension. Landy had landed partially on top of Katherine, whose legs were bent awkwardly beneath him. She could feel his weight bearing down on her and hear his labored breathing in his ear. "Oh no. Did I hurt you? Is anything broken?" he cried. She shook his head in response but didn't move to get up immediately. She had never felt a man so close to her, and she flushed brightly as his hand brushed her thigh while he straightened up. It took them a couple of seconds to work out how to untangle themselves. "I'm so sorry, Katherine." It was the first time that he had used her name so casually, without adding "Miss" at the beginning. It sounded good coming out of his mouth, but now he regretted being so bold. "Again, I'm so sorry. I really don't know what happened. The ladder was wobbling badly. It wasn't your fault. It's an old ladder that isn't fit to be used anymore. She noticed that her savior was looking at her shoulder. Following his gaze, she saw that her dress had ripped, leaving a fragment of her underwear tantalizingly on show. Lowering her gaze, she quickly covered up. It was Landy's turn to blush. "Did you hurt anything?" He reached out a hand as though to examine her, but then left it hanging there awkwardly in between them. Katherine fought back the impulse to reach out for it. "The only thing that got bruised was my pride. I don't think anyone else saw you. Pretty much everyone's sleeping or plain drunk at this time of day. And can I ask why you aren't doing either of those things, Mr. Landy?" He felt like a kid speaking to a girl for the first time. The touch of her body falling on top of him and the familiarity that was appearing in their conversation was making him lightheaded. I guess I work too hard sometimes." "Well, all of the time, really." "Me, too. Maybe it would be good to relax more often. Maybe we should meet like this again?" She laughed. "Maybe. I'm not sure my heart could take many more falls like that, though. My back couldn't either." She reached out to touch his shoulder, gently examining it for damage. "Are you sure that you aren't hurt?" "Not at all." She smoothed down her dress while her heart raced. What was she doing? She was making it too obvious that she was interested. Yet, she wasn't sure if she was interested, but that electrifying moment when he had grabbed her as she fell had set her senses alight. Landy was looking down at his shoes. She now knew him well enough to know that he did that when he needed some thinking time. The newspaper man was torn. His senses were also tingling, but the alarm bells had gone off in his head as well. He could still almost feel her body in his hands. And now, she seemed to be leaving the door open for an invitation to spend time together. It sounded too good to be true. But what if he opened his heart to her and then lost her like he had lost every other woman he had loved? Landy mumbled a few words that even he didn't understand. He then stumbled into his office and shut the door behind him. It was all happening too fast, and he was losing control of the situation. Katherine stood outside, alone and confused. Why had she just gone and made a fool of herself like that? Again? He had saved her in the same way that he would have saved any woman he saw falling off a ladder outside his office. Why did she read so much into it and try to make it into something it wasn't? The only doubt she had was around how he had been so quick to react. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that Landy had appeared out of nowhere almost at the same time she had shouted out for help. Had he been watching her, or did he just happen to be passing the building at the time? Anyway, all she had to do was thank him for his help and then get back to work. All that silly talk about relaxing had just upset Landy and opened up the rift between them again. As she started scrubbing the floor furiously, she swore to herself that it would never, ever happen again. It was time to forget all about her neighbor and his strange mood swings. Chapter 9. Most days, the sun would beat down on the dusty main street relentlessly, but Katherine had discovered a lovely, shady spot down by the lake where she would go to have lunch all alone. It was her only real break in incredibly busy days that started when the sun came up and ended long after night had fallen over Mossy Meadow. She was working on a few orders for dresses, but mainly it was all about trying to put the long-neglected shop and living space in order. Sometimes, her mind flitted to the subject of Landy Grant. Her cheeks flushed when she remembered how he had grabbed her when she fell off the ladder. His strong hands on her body and then the look on his face had convinced her that he was interested in her after all. Yet, when he had rushed off so abruptly, it had immediately shut down the feeling that had been growing in her. "Get a hold of yourself, girl. You're not here for a husband," she scolded herself as she got back home. In fact, one of the reasons for coming here had been to get away from men. For the first time, she was able to admit to herself that she had been running away from Boston. She had picked the first stagecoach she could find and then got off it at the first place whose name attracted her. Now, she had almost fallen for the first man to show even the slightest interest in her. Back in her new home, she could see things more clearly once again. Without doubt, it was time to take charge of her life. She needed a plan that didn't involve a husband or running away to somewhere else. It was time to really roll up her sleeves and make this work. She bent over and then got down on her knees and scrubbed the floor again. Would those horrid stains ever come out? She didn't want to admit that she had been hurt by the way that he had treated her since the day he had saved her. She had seen him out in the town twice, and on both occasions, he had avoided her by changing direction, pretending not to notice her. She thought that they were friends, but it was looking increasingly as though that wasn't the case at all. As darkness fell over the town, she felt more alone than ever before. Would she ever feel at home here? It was just like her grandmother had warned her all those years ago. Sighing, she lit a candle and decided to get an early night. The last few days had been exhausting. However, she saw a half-finished dress and decided to try and finish it off before going to bed. Next door, Landy was burning the midnight oil in his newspaper office. He had taken the kids there to sleep as he had a huge amount of work to do and didn't want his children to be alone in the house all night. For some reason, he had been finding it incredibly difficult to concentrate on writing the last few days. He looked down at them and swore for the 1000th time that he would never allow anyone or anything to hurt them. "You are all I've got, and I'm all you've got." He bent over and tenderly smoothed the hair of his youngest child, Sadie. Choosing the safe life for everyone might be the boring approach, but he would tremble with fear every time that he thought of the complications that would arise if he gave in to the temptation to try again with Katherine. "Help! Fire! There's a fire!" The frantic shouting from outside caused him to jump up. "It's Lucky's property. It's burning." The blood ran cold in his veins. "Katherine!" He ran outside and saw the flames licking fiercely at the door and windows. The seamstress had also been working late but must have fallen asleep over a half-finished dress through sheer exhaustion. And then, she likely knocked over her lantern. Fire had quickly ripped through the ramshackle building. It was clear that the wooden structure wasn't going to last long. A crowd had gathered outside but no one had yet risked entering the burning building. Landy quickly wet his kerchief in a water trough and rushed inside. No one could believe that quiet and reserved Landy Grant was the only person brave enough to try and rescue the seamstress, but then, most didn't know that Katherine would be in there. "Be careful, Landy. Don't stay in too long." The crowd shouted their encouragement and advice, but no one else volunteered to go in and help look for Katherine. Inside, Landy could barely see his own hands in front of his face. The place was filled with thick smoke. He stopped and coughed, doubled over in pain. Something splintered, causing the whole house to shake. "Katherine! Where are you?" he screamed. Still holding the wet cloth over his mouth and nose, he explored the building, trying desperately to remember the layout. Where was she? Her bed was at the back of the property, but after reaching there, he discovered that it was empty. His legs were getting heavy, and his breathing was increasingly labored. Where did she work? Over by the side window? There was no sign of her there either. Landy had no way of knowing that she had recently set up a new working space where the light was better for intricate tasks. "Katherine! Can you hear me? It's Landy. Landy." The voice sounded weak and incredibly far away from him. The smoke was getting worse, and the heat was now almost unbearable. "Where are you?" "I'm in the workshop. Upstairs." "I'm coming." Landy finally reached the upstairs workshop. The flames seemed to get worse as he went up the stairs. It looked like the fire had started upstairs. Why hadn't Katherine tried to escape before it had spread so much? Was she injured and unable to move? What he saw upstairs took his breath away. The seamstress was trying to fight the raging fire all alone. Her clothes were tattered and her hair was matted to her face with sweat from the intense heat. Even in this extreme situation, he couldn't help admire her courage. Something in his heart shifted in that moment, and he felt as though a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Bring water." Katherine's voice was dry and husky, but determined. Landy hesitated for only a second. He had to grab her and pull her out of there first. The building didn't matter. "Leave the building. We can still get out." "No." I need to save everything that I can. She erupted into a fit of coughing. Save yourself. Please. Water, Landy. Look. I've smothered some of it. The urgency in her voice and in her flashing green eyes made him rush out to the window. Water, he screamed. He saw someone dip a bucket in the water trough and run inside. Get out, he hollered at her. I'll fight it. Landy made sure there was a route to the stairs, so that Katherine could get out. He heard whoever had come in downstairs and knew they had thrown the water. Come on. Let's work together to help her, he heard through the broken window. He saw more volunteers step forward to take water inside. Out. Now, he ordered Katherine, forcing her down the steps. She was crying when he left her with Amy. The people of Mossy Meadow worked together until the sun came up. The store was almost completely destroyed, but they had saved the building from collapsing. Just as importantly, they had managed to protect some of Katherine's materials and tools from being consumed by the flames, although it was yet to be seen what state they were in. Landy stumbled over to her in the thin light of morning. Let's get you over to see the document. Katherine shook her head at the suggestion, but Landy insisted that she let him take him over to see the town's doctor. Landy was incredibly proud of her, but she seemed so exhausted that he was amazed she could still stand up. At the very least, she needed a few days' rest. He didn't feel much better. You were brave, Katherine, but you need to take care of yourself now. I'll take you to the dock and then I'll come back here to clean up. No. You rest, too. She swallowed hard and he knew her throat hurt. I don't know what I would have done without your help. She collapsed into his arms and wasn't aware of anything else until she woke up the next day in Doc's clinic. Chapter 10. Katherine was in terrible pain but didn't want to admit it to anyone, especially Landy. She was physically exhausted and had been burned on her arms and face. Landy had been scorched too, but he pressed on, such was his overwhelming concern for his neighbor. Doc did a good job in helping Katherine to recover. But there was only so much he could do with the very basic equipment and medicine at his disposal. He had worked hard for years looking after the townsfolk, but it was often luck and sheer willpower that got people better. Doc was a thin, sensitive-looking man with glasses that appeared to be a few sizes too big for him. He had tried his best to save Landy's first wife all those years ago and still felt a pang of guilt at not being able to do so. How is she doing, Doc? The same look of concern on the newspaper man's face caused Doc to remember the details of the past even more clearly. Landy had been a bright, enthusiastic young man back then, but he had suffered terribly since that unforgettable time. She is going to be fine. She just needs to get some rest and lots of liquid. The burns. I've treated the worst of them. Some aren't as bad as they looked. She'll have some scarring, though. She was lucky you came along to help her when you did. Thank God. Doc patted his old friend on the back. Patience. We just need to show some patience and take good care of her. Katherine was extremely worried about the future. Until her hands healed, she would be unable to sew. In addition, her shop was in ruins. She had no idea if her materials and tools had been saved or not. She was going to have to start from scratch. Did she have the inner strength to do it? Katherine stayed in Doc's clinic while she recovered. All the time, her mind was racing with worries and ideas. Doc gave her lots of water and tea, but it was his kind words that helped her recover more than anything else. Landy was careful not to take up too much of her time, as Doc said that she needed time to rest to recover. However, he was extremely considerate in taking her food and bits of news every day. He had finally made up his mind. He would speak to her seriously and openly about the future once she was fully recovered. The idea of losing her in the fire had driven home how important she was in his life. Was it worse to love a woman and lose her, or not to admit his love and lose her anyway? It seemed clear to him that letting her slip away without even trying would be the worst thing he could do. The day she was due to be released, Doc told her that she had a visitor who had brought her flowers. She sat up in bed, expecting Landy's familiar tall frame and shy smile to appear in the doorway. She had grown used to seeing him every day and had noticed that his attitude had softened. He seemed to be more relaxed in her presence and hadn't tried to run away like before. But she got a shock. It was Jess who had come to visit her this time. "Hello, Katherine. I wanted to see how you were doing. I know Amy's been here, but I hadn't come yet." He clumsily laid the flowers in front of her, holding his hat in his hands. Something wasn't right here. Amy had been visiting her every day but hadn't come today. Why did Jess come in her place? You're probably wondering why I came. It's because I want to work with you. To rebuild the shop. My Colleen hasn't arrived and I thought, maybe, we could spend some time together if she never comes. Katherine was taken aback by the invitation. She had to admit that Jess's openness and honesty was refreshing. She had grown tired of the cat and mouse game that she and Landy were playing. Jess might not be the subtlest man in the world, but she didn't feel in a position to turn down his offer of help, even if she wasn't particularly interested in the idea of them getting to know each on a deeper level. "I would be more than happy for you to help. I just can't see what we can do to get my business up and running. Have some faith, Katherine. I have some free time now that I have finished the harvest. Together, we can get your business back on track." "That is so kind of you. I do hope we can do it. I was just starting to get used to life here in Mossy Meadow. Heck, it took me a few years and more to get used to this place." "How did you feel about coming here, Jess?" The farmer shrugged heavily. No one had ever asked him the question before, and in truth, he'd mainly come because his family had. "I guess my family needed a fresh start. I'm sure Amy shared that with you. We came from the East, and it was a struggle. Once I got older, I got the chance of some cheap land here, and after our parents died, it's been me and Amy ever since." Katherine nodded. "Listen, why don't we meet for breakfast tomorrow morning and see how the shop is looking?" "Thank you, Jess." "All right." Jess walked out of the doc's clinic, whistling and looking mighty happy. From a distance, Landy watched Jess and kicked the dirt in frustration. It was clear that his friend was whistling because of Katherine. Had Landy left it too late to make his move? It looked as though Jess had plucked up the courage to go and speak to Katherine as more than just a friend interested in her health. Jess was his friend, but if it came down to it, he would much rather lose a friend than lose Katherine. He decided right then to take his kids along with him to the clinic later that day, as Katherine had shown some interest in getting to know them. "Hello, Katherine, are you feeling better today?" Landy tried hard to sound upbeat, but fear was gnawing away at him. Jess had been quite far away, but there was no doubt in his mind that he looked very much like a man who was happy with life. It gnawed on Landy that Jess had made a move on Katherine now that his mail-order bride didn't look like she was turning up. "These youngsters must be your lovely kids. My, they are bigger than I had expected." The kids got on well with Katherine right away, especially young Sadie. Katherine didn't have much experience with children, but she quickly felt at home with these polite, educated youngsters. "My gran once told me that you can tell what a man is like by looking at how his children behave. Do I pass the test?" "Of course, your children are delightful." The feeling seemed to be mutual, as the kids seemed to be delighted to spend time with Katherine. Seeing them together made Landy realize what it was that they were missing. It was the same thing he was missing, a woman. They all needed the warmth and love that a woman like Katherine could bring to them. He tried his best to look after and provide for them, but there were some things that he just couldn't seem to do. He felt insanely jealous at the thought of Jess spending the rest of his life with Katherine while he was alone and miserable. Was there still time to win her heart? He had no idea. He was confused and needed time alone to think about it all first. Could he run the risk of rejection at this stage? Now that he had seriously thought about what life with Katherine would be like, he would be utterly devastated if she rejected him. They chatted pleasantly for a while, but Landy felt that something had changed between them. The spark was gone. Was she being deliberately distant now, or was she just tired after a long day? Katherine had a question on her lips, but she couldn't ask it. What had happened to the children's mother? She had heard a few comments, and the doc seemed to suggest something about an illness. It was clear that Landy was a single father, but she needed to know what exactly had happened to the previous woman he had loved and lost. That's 3 times you've saved me now. It took Landy a moment to clear his head and work out what she meant. Just twice, really. The ladder and the fire. Don't be so modest. You saved me in the street brawl. No, you were going to win that fight. He quickly steered the conversation away from the fight, to avoid the subject of Jess coming up. Anyway, when can we start working to put your workshop back together again? She looked away, as though embarrassed. Jess was over earlier to offer his help on that. I see. We can all work together if you like. No. I will find some other way to help you. As Landy left the clinic, there was a horrible, sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. Why hadn't he made his move before Jess had? She had been waiting for him to show his intentions. He was sure of it now. He should have kissed her when he caught her falling off the ladder. Or while fighting the fire together. Or at any other time. Could he still save the situation before it was too late? Early the next morning, Landy asked a few of the town's older women if they could take food to Katherine while she recovered. However, he then realized that he didn't know where she would be living once she left the clinic. Did she have enough money to go back to the hotel? Suddenly, he realized that Jess could have offered her room at his house. Maybe that was why he looked so pleased with himself when he'd left the clinic the day before. Landy's heart felt as though it was going to leap right out of his chest as he hurried along the street. If she moved in with Jess, then all hope was lost. As he waked over toward the clinic to inquire, he saw Katherine sifting through the rubble in her burned-out shop. The relief he felt made him smile more broadly than the occasion merited, making the seamstress look at him suspiciously. I was just looking for you, he greeted her. Oh. Was it his imagination, or was she looking nervous to see him? Possibly even guilty. I spoke to a few women in town and they are going to bring you some food and look after you until you are feeling better. Thank you. The people here in Mossy Meadow have been good to me. Then I wanted to see if you would be happy with an interview about the fire. I knew you didn't appreciate the last story I wrote about you. I'll need to think about the story, although I do accept that it was a pretty big happening in this town. Everyone is talking about it. It could end up being good for your business. He gently touched her bandaged hands as though to reassure her. Katherine winced slightly. Sorry. I thought I was being gentle. It's all right. It didn't really hurt. The two of them stood in the middle of the burned shop, looking at each other. Neither knew how long their silent gaze lasted. It was probably just a few seconds, but it could have been an eternity. Both of them knew that the other was close to saying or doing something that they both wanted. Yet, both were completely paralyzed by fear. Katherine's hand was still hovering over her other, bandaged hand. Landy's hand that had lightly touched her was still slightly outstretched. It would only take a small movement from either of them to come together at last. Ah, there you are, Katherine. Oh Landy, I didn't know you were here. It was Jess, turning up as promised. A brief, awkward moment followed before Landy made his excuses and shuffled off. Katherine and Jess got to work, but the air was heavy with the strong, unspoken feelings that Landy's presence had left behind. Jess and Katherine worked together in almost total silence the rest of the morning. Chapter 11. Landy hadn't expected his story to get such a reaction. It was true that he had poured all of his efforts into writing a powerful, heart-wrenching tale of how a gritty young businesswoman starting a new life in Mossy Meadow had suffered a tragedy. The truth was that this town had never had much of a community spirit about it. The population was made up of a broad assortment of people who had traveled there from all over the country and even further to start a new life. Most of the residents only seemed to know a few of their closest neighbors, and they kept themselves to themselves whenever possible. The ongoing plan to build a church seemed to be the best idea to make it into a real community at last, but it was Katherine's story that had helped to bring people together for the first time. The offers of help had started as a trickle but soon turned into a flood. Farmers donated food. Housewives ordered new dresses. Everyone with some spare time offered to help put the building back into shape. Offers of help had even come from neighboring towns and from people who had never set foot in Mossy Meadow. They all admired the grit of this young lady who had suffered a huge setback but had been brave enough to stay and carry on fighting for her dream. Landy's article was beautifully written and more than a few tears had been shed by people reading it. He was proud of the piece, as he had spent long hours crafting it in order to get every word exactly as it should be. "Katherine, I've got some good news for you." It had taken him a lot of time to pluck up the courage to visit her. Thankfully, Jess was nowhere to be seen this time. "You want to order a new dress?" "No, I haven't yet been convinced that it's the right style for me." "Where have you been lately?" The atmosphere between them was a lot lighter than the last time. Landy leaned against the wall and told her about all of the offers of help that had come flooding in. "Since you're still recovering, I took it on myself to organize everything." "Oh my. I don't know what I'd do without you. I really appreciate the story you wrote about me. It was really well phrased. It was easy to write and now people just want to help you. That's, well, shocking. Maybe this business is going to work out all right after all." "It is. Everything is going to be fine." Landy stared at his shoes for a moment. Katherine knew that he was thinking about whether or not to say something, but he let the silence drag on. She was getting used to his ways and was strangely reassured by them. "I was thinking a little, and I hope you're not upset or annoyed about this, because I put a lot of thought into it and it seems such a shame to." Katherine laughed and interrupted him. "I won't know whether to be upset until you finally spit out the words. There are going to be a lot of people working in here over the next few days, making it as good as new. So, I took the liberty of setting up a little space for you in the back of the newspaper office. You will have peace and quiet there to sleep, eat, and rest. I won't bother you at all." Katherine felt tears welling up in her eyes. He was so kind and thoughtful. She looked at her shoes as she tried to work out how to answer. Goodness, she was even copying his mannerisms now. "I don't know what to say." It was the truth that she was lost for words. After some false starts, it felt as though this was going to be a turning point in their relationship. If she listened to her heart and said yes, then she had little doubt that being so close together would cause the sparks to fly. If she let her head rule, then she would say no and they might never get another chance like this. Her mouth was dry and her heart was thumping. Instead of trying to get the right words out, she made a short nodding motion with her head. "Is that a yes or a no?" "It's more of a, I hope I'm not making a big mistake, but sometimes in life you have to take a chance. I'm still not sure if it's a yes or a no. Should I roll out the welcome mat or not?" "It's a yes." "Yes, I'll take my few pathetic belongings that weren't burned to a crisp over later." He grinned. "That's wonderful. I mean, not about the pathetic belongings. That's awful." They both smiled, more in relief than anything else. They had got through a difficult conversation and now had the chance to get to know each other better. It might just prove to be easier from now on. When she knocked on the door of the newspaper office later, Landy was suffering an attack of nervousness. The thought of having another woman in his life, even briefly, wasn't something that he could have imagined before meeting this incredible newcomer. How was he meant to act now? Should he be kind and considerate or be more reticent and keep his distance? "Can I come in?" "Make yourself at home. It isn't much, but I've tried to make it more homey where possible." The office was small and the Irish girl had to almost brush past her friend to get to the space that he had set up for her. It was the first time she had tried to identify the distinctive smell that she now associated with him. It smelled like a mixture of paper, ink, and spices. She realized with a jolt that this smell had been in her mind a lot lately. You can open the window if it gets too stuffy, but you need to give it a bit of a push. Katherine looked at the window and then down at her hands, still bandaged but well on the road to recovery. "I'm sorry, let me open it for you." Landy put a hand on her shoulder as he went past. It was a brief, reassuring touch, but Katherine made it more important by resting her hand lightly on top of his. He stopped in his tracks and looked at her. "Thank you for doing this for me," she murmured. "Oh, it's not a problem. The window isn't that hard to open. You know what I mean. Letting me into your office. I know that you are a private, reserved man, and I respect that." Their hands were still lightly touching on her shoulder. It felt good, and neither showed any sign of moving away. "I just want to help you in any way I can. You have become important to me." Katherine gulped. "Listen, I was talking to Amy and I know some about your past. I know you've been hurt." "What did she say?" The spell was broken as he tugged his hand away. Sadness appeared in his intense, gray eyes. Had she spoken about this too soon? "I've been hurt too, Landy." He took a deep breath and made a visible effort to remain in control. "Now you know about my story, why not tell me yours? It surely can't be as bad as mine." "Don't be so sure, mister. There's a good reason why a young woman like me heads off across the country to escape the demons of her past." The next few hours flew past, as each told the other about their bad luck. Neither had ever opened up like this before, but it felt so right. Chapter 12. The couple settled into a comfortable routine that felt right for both of them. They would have a leisurely breakfast together in the newspaper office before Landy got to work on the day's stories. Katherine would help him out by listening to his ideas and giving her opinions on which stories sounded more interesting. He was amazed to see how she was nearly always right, too. The townsfolk who were helping rebuild the seamstress shop arrived a little later each morning, and Katherine would join them to work hard until lunchtime. Jess was in the group, but he was keeping his distance from Katherine for some reason. There still appeared to be no sign of Colleen, though. Katherine and Landy would have lunched together down by the lake or river, and then she would go back to working on her store in the afternoon. His kids would often join them for lunch, laughing and joking with Katherine while Landy looked on happily. They probably would have looked like any normal family to passers-by, but no one ever saw them. As reserved and private as ever, Landy always chose secluded spots where they could eat in peace. At the end of the day, they would chat for a while in the office before Landy went home and Katherine settled down to sleep, exhausted but happy at the end of another long, tiring day. After a week, Landy was sitting in the office, waiting for her to come home. Night had fallen, and she should be around any moment now. A knock on the door told him that she was back. "I have such good news, Landy. The work is almost finished and my hands are feeling better. I'll be back at work tomorrow." Landy tried to paint a smile on his face. This was the moment he was dreading. He knew that the store was almost ready, but he hadn't expected it to be so soon. "So, it's your last night here?" "I guess so. Thanks for giving me somewhere to stay these last days. I truly appreciate it. It's been my pleasure. Let's celebrate your business get back on its feet. I've got a bottle of gin here somewhere." Katherine wasn't a drinker, but the occasion made her give it a try. After half a glass each, both of them were feeling a bit lightheaded. "Do you know how long this bottle of gin has been in my office?" Katherine shrugged. "It was a wedding gift. For my second wedding. Rose died before we even got a chance to open it together." "I'm sorry." She lightly touched his arm. "I should be over it by now. These things take time. I should know, I still haven't got over the embarrassment of my own failure. I never even made it past the altar. I still can't understand why a man would let you down like that." Katherine laughed bitterly. "I should have seen the signs. Some men just don't know what they want. Then there are the others, who know only too well what they want but don't know how to get it. And you, Landy. What do you want? What did he want? Did he even know? And if he did he dare to admit it?" He thought about his answer in silence for a few minutes while staring at the empty glass in his hand. "I have been confused, Katherine. And maybe a bit afraid. I enjoy being around you and would like the chance to see if maybe, just maybe, there is something there that makes us forget the past. We have both suffered, but maybe it is time to start to enjoy life again. What do you think?" Silence. Had he scared her off? Slowly, he put down his glass and looked over to see her reaction. He smiled tenderly. Katherine was fast asleep. She hadn't heard a single word of his heartfelt speech. The next day, Katherine moved out. Landy wanted to repeat his speech from the previous night, but without the help of some gin in his body, the words wouldn't come. Once he was alone, he felt lonelier than ever before. The last few days sharing time with Katherine had been a real pleasure, but now he realized how empty his life had been before his new neighbor had appeared. How had he lived for so long without the love of a good woman? Next door, Katherine was having similar feelings. It had been the first time that she had opened up and chatted with a man like she had done with Landy over the last few days. Perhaps all it would have taken to grow the relationship would have been for one or other of them to go next door and say out loud the words that both of them were thinking. Yet, neither of them felt the courage needed to take those few, small steps. Instead, they each stayed in their own property and stewed in silence. Chapter 13. Katherine was pleased with her new store. In fact, she still couldn't quite believe what she was looking at the first time she walked in. The place looked fantastic, and she had enough new orders to keep her busy for the next few weeks. Things were definitely looking up in her life, she thought to herself happily. It looked like she could carve out a home and a life for herself here after all. She still had a smile on her face when she looked up and saw Jess standing in the doorway. He had a worried look on his face and was nervously twisting his hat in his hands. "Oh, Jess. Is everything all right?" "Amy. She's fine. Everyone's fine. It's for something else that I am here." He cleared his throat. "Colleen isn't coming here. She's changed her mind about getting married to me. I'm so sorry. I know how much you wanted this to work out. I know. But the whole thing has got me thinking." Something in the way his tone of voice had changed made Katherine pay even more attention. "Katherine, I wanted to ask if maybe we could spend some time together. We was going to before, I know. But now. Well, now I know for sure Colleen ain't coming." Katherine gulped, suddenly self-conscious. This was the last thing that she had expected that day. Her thoughts instinctively turned to Landy and what he would say. Would he care? I don't know, Jess. You're such a nice man, and I'm so flattered. I just think that maybe I wasn't expecting this right now. I've been so busy with the fire and everything. He waited patiently until her nervous babbling died out. I don't want to put too much pressure on you. We could just have lunch by the river if you like. His relaxed way of talking helped Katherine to feel more at ease. What harm could it do to go for a nice lunch with a friendly man whom she trusted? Besides, Landy certainly hadn't declared himself. All right, Jess. I'll drop by your house tomorrow at lunchtime if that suits you. Just for lunch. As friends. The next day, Jess and Katherine had an enjoyable lunch. Jess was the perfect gentleman and never made any suggestion that they might become more than friends. However, Katherine could sense that he was keen to find a wife now that Colleen had let him down. Had he now set his mind on marrying her? She was reluctant to give him any indication of being willing to be courted, as she still felt Landy was in her heart. If only Landy had been capable of making the next move in their relationship. While he was walking home, the newspaper man had seen Jess and Katherine together and feared the worst. He missed spending time with Katherine and the next day wanted to invite her to lunch. However, her store was empty. Then, the sight of Katherine and Jess walking together toward the river made his blood run cold. He had thought that the danger of Jess making a move had disappeared, but it now looked as though he was wrong. He ran into Amy shortly after that, and she confirmed his worst fears. No, Colleen isn't coming to Mossy Meadow. It looks like my brother is hoping to woo Katherine instead, but she is playing hard to get. Landy grunted a vague reply, unable or unwilling to put his thoughts into words. I doubt that they are really in love, but my brother is a sensible man. He probably sees Katherine as being his last chance to get a nice, decent wife. Good luck to him. I thought you and Katherine might have had something together, but it looks as though you are happy being just good friends, aren't you? After the conversation, Landy was furious. How could anyone look on lovely Katherine as just a convenient wife? She was the kind of woman who deserved to be loved and cherished. He didn't want to be just good friends with her either. He loved her. Back in his office, he angrily threw a bunch of papers to the floor and kicked them into a corner. You were meant to be mine, dang it all. You were meant to be mine. He had a bad night, tossing and turning in his bed while recalling all of the good and bad moments that he and Katherine had shared. By the time the sun was due to come up, he had made a decision that he had to see through, even if he felt that his whole body was trembling. This wasn't the time to back down and be timid. Landy strode down the familiar main street, but he felt as though he was in a world far away from there. Nothing else mattered anymore. There was only one objective in his mind, and he wasn't going to stop until he had achieved it. A candle was still flickering in Katherine's Seamstress store. It was an ungodly hour, but waiting until the morning sun was fully up simply wasn't an option. He knocked on the door, politely but firmly. After what felt like an eternity, the door cracked open, and Katherine's head poked out. Her hair was all messed up and her huge green eyes were sleepy. She had never looked more gorgeous. Landy. It's very early. Did you want to interview me for something? Maybe it could wait until I've woken up properly. It can't wait. I shouldn't have waited this long. She felt a tingling sensation on her skin. Was this the moment they had both put off for so long? She wasn't ready for it yet. Was she? Smoothing out her wild hair with one hand and pulling the door open with the other, Katherine moved aside. You better come in, Landy. I'll leave the door open, though, if you don't mind. She hadn't expected her voice to sound so shaky, but the emotion of the moment was almost making her lose all control. I'll stay out here. What? I thought you wanted to. I only came here to say one simple thing, Katherine. She looked up at him. His intelligent eyes were shining in the early morning sun, and he was smiling in a more relaxed manner than she had ever seen him smile before. Had he finally managed to come to terms with his past and decided to move on? I came here to declare my love for you, Katherine Moore. Well, this is quite the surprise, Landy Grant. No, it isn't. No. It isn't. You've known that this moment would arrive since we first set eyes on each other. Yes, maybe I did. But we've both been hurt, Landy. Are we ready to take a chance on love again? There's only one way to find out. In that case, I'm ready to give it a try. What do we do now? She laughed lightly and put her hands on her hips while he looked her up and down. It was time to enjoy life again. I was kind of thinking of giving you a kiss and then sitting down for a long, honest conversation about everything that life has in store for us. Her cheeks flamed with the mention of the kiss, but she found that she quite liked the idea. And then to sit and dream together of their future with his lovely children? She smiled. It all sounds good to me, Landy. Very good, in fact. To me, too, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Then he took her in his arms and gave her the promised kiss. The end. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming story by Susannah Calloway. You can be assured that all her books are clean and wholesome. To find other romances by Susannah Calloway, as well as the other authors at Tika House Publishing, visit www.tikahousepublishing.com. Remember to hit like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next Susannah Calloway Western romance.